3 months ago, my sister Cordelia called me at 2 in the morning, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her words. She was begging me to save a piece of junk, a completely destroyed 1988 Chevy pickup that had been rotting in our grandfather's backyard for 15 years. The truck hadn't run since 2009, and honestly, it looked like it belonged in a scrapyard, not a restoration shop. But Cordelia wasn't calling about just any truck. This was Grandpa Thad's truck, the same forest green Silverado he'd bought brand new in 1988 after coming home from his second tour in Vietnam. The truck that taught me everything I know about engines, about hard work, about what it means to fix something that's completely broken. What my sister didn't tell me that night, what she couldn't bring herself to say through her tears, was that this rusted piece of metal held the key to healing our family's deepest wound. A wound that had been bleeding for 2 years, ever since the worst fight of my life, drove a wedge between me and the man who raised me. I quote Jake Morrison. And I've been restoring classic cars on YouTube for the past 5 years. My channel has over 800,000 subscribers, and I've brought dozens of vehicles back from the dead. But I'd never attempted anything like this. I'd never tried to restore a relationship that I thought was broken beyond repair. Standing in my grandfather's backyard that night, looking at what remained of his beloved pickup, I realized this wasn't just about saving a truck. The frame was cracked, the engine was seized solid, and rust had eaten through most of the body panels. By any logical measure, this restoration was impossible. But impossible has never stopped me before. And as I ran my hand across the hood, feeling the rough texture of 15 years of neglect, I knew that this truck represented something much bigger than metal and memories. It represented a second chance. A chance to make things right with the most important person in my life, before it was too late. What I didn't know that night was that time was running out faster than any of us realized, and that this restoration would become the most important project I'd ever undertaken. Not just for my channel, but for my family, my grandfather, and myself. To understand why that phone call from Cordelia hit me like a freight train, you need to know about the man who shaped everything I am today. My grandfather, Thaddeus Morrison, wasn't just a Vietnam veteran. He was my hero, my mentor, and for the last 20 years of my life, my father figure. When I was 12 years old, my parents died in a car accident on Interstate 75. One moment I had a normal family, and the next moment I was an orphan living with my grandparents in rural Georgia. Most kids would have been destroyed by that kind of trauma, but Grandpa Thad had a different plan. He decided that the best way to help a grieving kid heal was to teach him how to fix things. That forest green, 1988 Chevy Silverado became our classroom. Every Saturday morning, without fail, Thad would wake me up at 7 a.m. and we'd head out to the garage. He taught me everything in that truck: how to change oil, how to replace brake pads, how to diagnose engine problems by sound alone. But more than that, he taught me patience, persistence, and the satisfaction that comes from taking something broken and making it whole again. "Jake," he'd say, wiping grease off his hands with that old red shop rag he kept in his back pocket, "life's gonna throw a lot of broken things your way. Cars, relationships, dreams. The measure of a man isn't whether things break, it's whether he has the guts to fix them." Those Saturday mornings weren't just about automotive repair. They were about rebuilding my entire world. Thad would tell me stories about his time in Vietnam, about the helicopters he worked on, about the friends he'd lost and the ones who made it home. He'd talk about buying that truck brand new in 1988, how it was the first major purchase he'd made after coming back from his second tour. "This truck represents freedom, Jake," he told me one Saturday when I was 16, teaching me how to rebuild the carburetor. After everything I saw over there, coming home and being able to drive anywhere I wanted, that was healing. By the time I graduated high school, I could tear down and rebuild that Chevy's engine blindfolded. More importantly, I'd found my calling. I started working at local garages, then opened my own shop, and eventually began documenting my restorations on YouTube. The channel grew slowly at first, but my grandfather was my biggest supporter. He'd watch every single video, leave encouraging comments, and send me pictures of classic cars he'd spotted around town. But success changed me in ways I didn't recognize at the time. As my channel grew to hundreds of thousands of subscribers, as sponsors started calling, as I moved from rural Georgia to Atlanta to expand my business, I started seeing myself differently. I was young, successful, and increasingly convinced that I was smarter than everyone around me, including the man who'd taught me everything. The fight happened 2 years ago during Thanksgiving dinner. We were talking about current events, and somehow the conversation turned to military involvement overseas. I made some comment about how military service was just government-sanctioned violence, how veterans were just tools of an imperialist system. It was the kind of pseudo-intellectual garbage that sounds profound when you're 29 and think you know everything. Thad went completely silent. Then he stood up from the table, looked me directly in the eyes and said, "Boy, you've forgotten where you came from. Success has made you cruel." Then he walked out. That was the last conversation we had. For 2 years, we existed in the same family but lived in different worlds. Cordelia tried everything to get us to reconcile. She'd invite us both to family gatherings, hoping we'd accidentally end up in the same room. She'd call me crying, begging me to just apologize. She'd tell me stories about how Thad would ask about my YouTube channel but was too proud to watch the videos anymore. But I was just as stubborn as he was. I convinced myself that I was right, that he was stuck in the past, that he needed to apologize to me. Every time I worked on a 1980s Chevy, every time I used a technique he taught me, every time someone complimented my mechanical skills, I felt a stab of guilt. But pride is a powerful drug, and I kept taking hits. My YouTube channel continued growing. I restored muscle cars, classic trucks, European sports cars. I became known for taking on impossible projects, for bringing vehicles back from the dead that other mechanics had given up on. But there was always something missing. The joy I'd felt working alongside Thad in that garage, the satisfaction of sharing a victory with someone who truly understood what we'd accomplished together. I threw myself into work, filming 12 hours a day, editing until 3 in the morning. Success became my medication, but it couldn't cure the real problem. Every night when I went to sleep, I wondered what Thad was doing, whether he was proud of what I'd built, whether he missed those Saturday mornings as much as I did. Cordelia never stopped trying to bridge the gap between us. She'd call me with updates about his health, about how he'd started gardening to keep his hands busy, about how that old pickup truck was slowly deteriorating in his backyard because he didn't have the energy to maintain it anymore. "Jake, he's getting older," she'd tell me during our weekly phone calls. "You're both going to regret this stubborn fight if something happens before you fix it." But I always had an excuse. I was too busy, too successful, too important to make the first move. I told myself that when the time was right, when I was ready, I'd reach out. I had no idea how quickly time could run out, or how that rusted pickup truck sitting in his backyard would become the key to everything I'd lost. That phone call came on a Tuesday night in March. I was in my shop working late, editing footage from a 1967 Mustang restoration, when my phone started buzzing. Cordelia's name flashed on the screen, and I almost didn't answer. She'd been calling more frequently lately, always with the same message about how I needed to swallow my pride and reach out to Grandpa Thad. But something in the way the phone kept ringing made me pick up. When I heard her voice, I knew immediately that everything had changed. "Jake, you need to come home right now." She was crying so hard I could barely make out the words. "Grandpa Thad collapsed at the VA hospital today. They rushed him into emergency surgery, and Jake, the doctors say he has maybe 3 months left." The wrench I'd been holding clattered to the concrete floor. "What are you talking about? 3 months left for what?" "Cancer, Jake. Stage 4 lung cancer. It's everywhere. His lungs, his liver, his lymph nodes. The doctors think it's related to Agent Orange exposure from Vietnam, but he's been hiding it from us for 8 months. 8 months, Jake. He's been going through chemotherapy alone, because he didn't want to be a burden on anyone." I felt like someone had punched me in the chest, while I'd been nursing my wounded pride for 2 years, refusing to make the first move in our stupid fight. My grandfather had been fighting for his life in complete silence. Is he asking for me? The question came out smaller than I intended. Cordelia, quote, see. Silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, she whispered, No, Jake, he's not asking for you. That hurt worse than anything she could have said. Even facing death, Thad was too stubborn or too hurt to want to see me. But Jake, there's something else. Something I need to tell you, and you're not going to like it. I drove through the night to get home, my mind racing with everything I should have said, everything I should have done differently over the past 2 years. When I got to the hospital, Cordelia was waiting in the parking lot looking exhausted and older than her 28 years. How bad is it really? I asked as we walked toward the entrance. Bad. The oncologist said 3 months was optimistic. It could be 6 weeks, maybe less. The cancer is aggressive, and at his age, his body can't handle the more intensive treatments. We sat in the hospital cafeteria at 3 in the morning, drinking terrible coffee while Cordelia told me everything she'd been hiding. How Thad had been losing weight for months but claimed he was just eating better. How he'd been coughing constantly but insisted it was just allergies. How she'd finally confronted him 2 weeks ago when she found chemotherapy appointment cards in his truck. He made me promise not to tell you, she said, stirring sugar into her coffee with shaking hands. He said you'd made it clear you didn't want him in your life and he wasn't going to guilt you into a deathbed reconciliation. That's not what I wanted. That's not what any of this was about. Then why didn't you call him, Jake? Why didn't you just pick up the phone? I couldn't answer that question because the truth made me sound like exactly what I was. A selfish, prideful fool who'd let his ego cost him 2 years with the most important person in his life. But Cordelia wasn't. Finished. She reached across the table and grabbed my hand, her nurse's fingers strong and steady despite her tears. Jake, there's something else. Something he doesn't know I'm going to tell you. She pulled out her phone and showed me a voice message Thad had left her the day before his collapse. His voice was weak, tired in a way I'd never heard before. Cordelia, honey, I've been thinking about that old pickup truck rotting in my backyard. You know, the one I taught Jake to drive in. I keep looking at it through the kitchen window and it's just sitting there dying, just like I am. I keep thinking that if someone could bring that truck back to life, really restore it to what it used to be, that would be something special. That would mean something. I don't suppose Jake would ever consider it, given how things are between us. But if he would, if anyone could make that truck run again, it would be him. The message continued, but I couldn't focus on the words because the weight of what he was really saying hit me like a freight train. This wasn't about the truck. This was about us. This was about taking something broken and making it whole again, just like he'd taught me all those years ago. Cordelia, where is the truck now? Still, in his backyard, same place it's been for 15 years. Jake, you need to see it before you make any decisions. It's not the truck you remember from when we were kids. It's bad. Really bad. The next morning, I drove to Thad's house for the first time in 2 years. The small white farmhouse looked the same, but everything felt different, knowing that the man inside was dying. The truck was parked behind the house, barely visible under 15 years of Georgia weather and neglect. When I pulled back the rotting tarp that covered it, my heart sank. This wasn't restoration material. This was scrap metal with sentimental value. The forest green paint had oxidized to a dull brown. Rust had eaten through the wheel wells, the door frames, and most of the bed. The windshield was spider-webbed with cracks, and when I popped the hood, I found an engine bay full of leaves, mouse nests, and corrosion so severe that most of the components were unidentifiable. I called Cordelia from the backyard, staring at what remained of my grandfather's beloved truck. Cordelia, this is impossible. The frame is cracked in 3 places. The engine block is cracked. The transmission is seized. It would cost more to restore this truck than to buy 10 trucks in better condition. I know, Jake. I told you it was bad. Bad doesn't cover this. This truck is beyond salvation. There's nothing left to save. But even as I said those words, I could hear Thad's voice in my head from all those Saturday mornings. The measure of a man isn't whether things break, Jake. It's whether he has the guts to fix them. Standing there in his backyard, looking at the physical manifestation of everything that had gone wrong between us. I realized that this wasn't about automotive restoration. This was about whether I had the courage to attempt something that seemed impossible, whether I could swallow my pride and try to fix what I'd broken, even if the chances of success were practically zero. The truck wasn't the only thing that needed restoration. Our relationship was just as rusted, just as damaged, just as seemingly beyond repair. But maybe, just maybe, if I could bring his truck back to life, I could find a way to bring us back to life too. Standing in that backyard, staring at 15 years of decay and neglect, I made a decision that was probably the stupidest thing I'd ever attempted in my entire career. I was going to restore that truck, and I was going to do it without telling my grandfather what I was doing. The reasoning was simple, even if it was insane. If I failed, if this restoration turned out to be impossible, Thad would never know I'd tried. He could go to his grave thinking I was still too proud and stubborn to care about his dying wish. But if somehow, against all odds, I could bring that truck back to life, maybe it would give us both a second chance. I called my shop foreman, Marcus, at 6 in the morning. "Marcus, I need you to bring the flatbed truck to an address in Milledgeville. We're picking up a 1988 Chevy Silverado. Boss, I thought we agreed no more pickups until after we finish the Corvette project. This one's different. This one's personal." That night, we loaded what remained of Thad's truck onto my trailer under cover of darkness. I felt like I was stealing, even though Cordelia had given me permission and the spare keys. But I couldn't risk Thad seeing the truck being towed away and asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. Back at my shop, under the harsh LED lights, the truck looked even worse than it had in the backyard shadows. I started the teardown process, documenting everything with my cameras out of habit, but I wasn't planning to publish these videos until I knew whether this crazy project would work. The first week was pure devastation. When I pulled the engine, I discovered that a cracked block was just the beginning of the problems. The frame wasn't just cracked, it was twisted from years of settling unevenly in the soft Georgia soil. The cab had rust holes so large I could put my fist through them. The bed was more corrosion than metal. Any rational person would have quit. Any smart businessman would have bought a donor truck in better condition and swapped the VIN plates. But this wasn't about rationality or smart business decisions. This was about proving to myself that some things are worth saving, no matter how broken they seem. I started making calls to every contact I'd built up over 5 years of YouTube restoration projects. I needed a frame straightening specialist who could work miracles. I needed a metal fabrication expert who could literally rebuild sections of the truck from scratch. I needed an engine machinist who could bore out the cracked block and sleeve it back to factory specifications. But the clock was ticking louder every day. Cordelia would call with updates on Thad's condition. The 3 months the doctors had given him was looking more like 6 weeks. He was losing weight rapidly, and the chemotherapy was making him weaker instead of stronger. "Jake, he's been asking about that truck again," she told me during one of our daily check-ins. "Yesterday, he asked me if I thought anyone in the family would want to restore it as a memorial after he's gone." I almost broke down crying right there in the hospital room. That conversation made me realize I needed help beyond what I could buy or borrow. I made a decision that went against every business instinct I'd developed. I posted a single video on my YouTube channel explaining the situation, without revealing it was for my grandfather. I told my 800,000 subscribers that I was attempting an impossible restoration for a dying veteran, and I asked for their help. The response was overwhelming. Within 24 hours, my inbox was flooded with offers. A machinist in Tennessee volunteered to rebuild the engine for free. A paint and body shop in South Carolina offered to handle the metalwork. Subscribers started sending parts they'd been hoarding for their own projects. A retired GM engineer sent me the original factory blueprints for the 1988 Silverado. But the most incredible offer came from an unexpected source. A viewer named Robert Chen, who turned out to be the owner of a classic car restoration business in California, called me personally. "Jake, I've been watching your channel for 3 years. My grandfather was also a Vietnam veteran, and he died before I could restore his 1969 Camaro. I'm flying to Georgia with my best fabricator, and we're going to help you save this truck. No charge, no strings attached. Some things matter more than money." Within 2 weeks, My small shop had been transformed into a command center, staffed by volunteers from across the country. We were working in shifts around the clock. Robert's fabricator was literally rebuilding the truck's frame while the machinist worked on sleeving the engine block. The paint shop was creating replacement body panels from scratch, using the original factory specifications. But as we worked, I started finding things inside the truck that hit me harder than any mechanical challenge. Wedged under the driver's seat, I found an old photograph of Thad in his army uniform, standing next to a helicopter in Vietnam. In the glove compartment, wrapped in plastic to protect it from moisture, was a letter I'd written him in elementary school. The letter was in my terrible 8-year-old handwriting. Dear Grandpa Thad, thank you for teaching me how to drive your truck. When I grow up, I want to fix cars just like you. You are the best grandpa in the world. Love, Jake. Reading. That letter in my shop, surrounded by the organized chaos of an impossible restoration, I started crying for the first time in 2 years. Not just because of what we'd lost, but because of what we'd found in each other all those years ago. Marcus found me sitting on the floor, holding that letter and sobbing like a child. Boss, you okay? Marcus, what if I can't fix this? What if all this work, all these people helping us, what if it's not enough? Jake, you've been asking the wrong question. It's not about whether you can fix the truck. It's about whether you can fix what's broken between you and your grandfather. And brother, the fact that you're trying this hard tells me you already have. With 3 weeks left on the doctor's timeline, we had a rolling chassis, a rebuilt engine, and body panels that were slowly taking shape. But we still had to assemble everything, get it running, and make it perfect enough to honor the memory of what that truck had meant to both of us. The race against time had begun, and I was about to find out whether love and determination could overcome the impossible. With 7 days left on the doctor's original timeline, we were running on pure adrenaline and desperation. The truck looked like a truck again, but looking right and running right are two completely different things. We'd rebuilt the engine, straightened the frame, fabricated new body panels, and painted everything in that original forest green that Thad had loved so much. But when it came time to fire it up, nothing happened. I quote, "He'd been awake for 36 hours straight, troubleshooting, electrical gremlins and fuel system problems that seemed to multiply every time we solved one. The rebuilt transmission was giving us fits, and the carburetor we'd painstakingly restored kept flooding. Robert and his fabricator had flown back to California, and most of the volunteers had returned to their regular jobs. It was down to me, Marcus, and sheer stubborn will. At 3 in the morning on Wednesday, with 4 days left, my phone rang. Cordelia's name appeared on the screen, and my heart dropped. I was sure she was calling to tell me we'd run out of time. Jake, don't panic, but I need to tell you something. Is he gone? The words came out as barely a whisper. No. But Jake, I told him. I couldn't keep lying to his face anymore. When he asked me again today why you haven't come to visit, I broke down and told him everything. About the truck, about what you've been doing, about how hard you've been working to restore it. I sat down hard on my shop stool, feeling like the world was spinning around me. What did he say? He was quiet for the longest time. Then he started crying, Jake. I've never seen him cry before, not even at Grandma's funeral. He just kept saying, that stubborn, wonderful boy, over and over. Is he angry that I didn't tell him? Angry? Jake, he's demanding that I bring him to your shop right now, at 3 in the morning. He wants to see what you've accomplished, and he wants to see it tonight. Panic shot through me like electricity. Cordelia, the truck isn't finished. It won't even start. I can't let him see it like this. Jake, he doesn't care if it runs. He cares that you tried. He cares that you've been killing yourself for 3 weeks trying to bring his memories back to life. An hour later, Cordelia's car pulled into my shop parking lot. Through the window, I could see Thad in the passenger seat, thin and frail in a way that broke my heart. She helped him into a wheelchair, and as they came through the shop doors, I realized I was about to face the man I'd hurt and disappointed, the man I'd been too proud to apologize to, the man who'd been fighting for his life while I nursed my wounded ego. But when Thad saw the truck, his reaction wasn't what I expected. He didn't look at the parts that weren't finished or the details that weren't perfect. He looked at the forest green paint that matched his memories, at the chrome bumpers that gleamed under the shop lights, at the interior we'd completely restored with original materials. "Jake," he said, his voice weak but steady, "you brought her back to life." "Grandpa, I'm so sorry. About the fight, about what I said, about not calling you for 2 years. I was wrong, and I was stupid, and I've regretted it every single day." He reached out from his wheelchair and took my grease-stained hand in his. "Son, we both said things we didn't mean. But this truck, what you've done here, this tells me everything I need to know about who you really are. But it doesn't run yet. The transmission is acting up, and I can't get the fuel system balanced. I wanted it to be perfect for you." Thad smiled that crooked smile I remembered from childhood. "Jake, perfection isn't about whether something runs flawlessly. Perfection is about the love and effort you put into trying to fix what's broken." Then he surprised me completely. "Help me out of this wheelchair. I want to look under the hood." For the next 2 hours, the three of us worked on that truck together. Thad couldn't do much physically, but his eyes were sharp and his memory was perfect. He diagnosed the transmission problem from the sound alone and walked me through the carburetor adjustment by feel, the same way he taught me 20 years earlier. "Try it now," he said at 5 in the morning. I turned the key and the engine caught immediately. It didn't just start, it purred like a contented cat, smooth and strong and perfect. The sound of that engine filled the shop and seemed to fill something inside all three of us that had been empty for too long. "Take me for a drive, Jake." We helped him into the passenger seat, and I slid behind the wheel of the truck that had taught me everything important I'd ever learned. As we pulled out of the shop and onto the empty pre-dawn streets, Thad reached over and squeezed my shoulder. "You know what the best part of this whole restoration is?" he asked. "What's that, Grandpa?" "It gave me my grandson back." We drove through our small town as the sun came up, past the high school where he'd taught me to parallel park, past the diner where we'd eaten breakfast every Saturday after working in the garage, past the church where we'd both been baptized decades apart. And for those precious hours, cruising in that perfectly restored 1988 Chevy Silverado, we weren't a dying man and his regretful grandson. We were just Thad and Jake, together again, riding in the truck that had always been the bridge between our hearts. When we got back to the shop, Thad looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Jake, I need you to promise me something." "Anything, Grandpa." "Promise me you'll keep this truck running. Promise me you'll drive it and remember that some things are worth fighting to save, even when they seem broken beyond repair." I promised, and I meant every word. Thad lived for exactly 18 more days after we finished the truck. But those 18 days were the most precious gift either of us could have asked for. Every morning, I'd drive to his house in the restored Silverado and pick him up for what we started calling our morning rounds. We'd cruise through town, stop at the hardware store where he'd worked for 30 years, visit the barber shop where he'd been getting the same haircut since 1975, and always end up at the diner for coffee and whatever story he felt like sharing. That day, those stories changed everything I thought I knew about my grandfather. He told me about the nightmares he still had from Vietnam, about how working on cars had been his therapy long before anyone understood PTSD. He explained how that truck had represented hope to him, a symbol that he could build something good and lasting despite everything he'd seen in the war. "Jake," he said one morning as we sat in the diner booth we'd claimed as our own, "I never told you why I really bought that truck brand new in 1988. I always figured it was because you needed reliable transportation." He shook his head, stirring sugar into his coffee with hands that shook slightly from the medication. "I bought it because I wanted to have something perfect to pass down to my grandson someday. Every Saturday when I taught you to work on it, I was really teaching you how to take care of something precious." Those words hit me harder than any wrench to the chest. All those years I'd thought he was just teaching me mechanical skills. I'd never understood that every oil change, every brake job, every tune-up had been his way of preparing me to be a guardian of something meaningful. But the most important conversation happened on day 16, when Thad was having a particularly weak morning and could barely make it to the passenger seat. "Jake, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting." I turned off the engine and gave him my full attention. "For the past 2 years, I've been watching your YouTube channel every single day. I created a fake account. So you wouldn't know, but I never missed a video. I was so proud of what you'd built, so amazed by your skill and creativity, but I was too stubborn to tell you." My throat tightened. "Grandpa, why didn't you just call me?" "Because I was afraid you'd hang up on me. Because I was hurt and proud and stupid, just like you were. We Morrison men, we're not good at admitting when we're wrong." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn soft from handling. "I wrote this letter 6 months ago, right after my diagnosis. I was going to mail it to you, but I kept finding excuses not to send it." The letter was 3 pages long, written in his careful mechanical handwriting. In it, he apologized for being harsh during our fight, praised my success with the YouTube channel, and expressed regret for all the time we'd wasted being angry at each other. But the last paragraph made me pull the truck over to the side of the road. "Jake, if something happens to me before we make peace, I want you to know that you turned out to be exactly the man I hoped you'd become. You're skilled, hardworking, and successful, but more importantly, you care about doing things right. That truck in my backyard is dying the same way I am. But if anyone could bring it back to life, it would be you. Not because you're a good mechanic, but because you understand that some things are worth saving, no matter how broken they seem." I sat in that truck, holding my grandfather's unsent letter, crying like I hadn't cried since I was 12 years old. Thad passed away peacefully on a Thursday morning. Cordelia called me at dawn, and when I got to his house, he looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. But there was a peaceful expression on his face that told me he'd found the resolution he'd been looking for. The funeral was standing room only. Apparently, my quiet, stubborn grandfather had touched more lives than any of us realized. Veterans from 3 different wars came to pay their respects. Former co-workers, neighbors, and people I'd never met all had stories about how Thad had helped them fix something when they couldn't afford a mechanic. But the biggest surprise came after the service, when a man I didn't recognize approached me in the church parking lot. "Are you Jake Morrison, the one who restored your grandfather's truck?" When I nodded, he handed me a business card. "I'm Jim Patterson from the VA hospital. Your grandfather talked about you and that truck every time he came in for treatment. He was so proud of what you'd accomplished, both with the restoration and with rebuilding your relationship." He paused, looking directly at me. "We've been looking for someone to start an automotive therapy program for our veterans, working with their hands, restoring vehicles, building something meaningful. Would you be interested in helping us develop something like that?" 6 months later, the Thaddeus Morrison Veterans Automotive Therapy Program opened at the VA hospital. We take donated vehicles that seem beyond saving and teach veterans to restore them, using the same patience and persistence that Thad taught me in his garage all those years ago. Every Saturday morning, I start up that 1988 Silverado and let it run while I drink my coffee. It's my way of maintaining our tradition, of keeping the promise I made to him. The truck runs perfectly, but more than that, it runs with purpose. It serves as a reminder that pride and stubbornness can steal precious time we can never recover. But it's never too late to try to fix what's broken. I learned that some restorations are about more than metal and mechanics. Sometimes the most important thing you can restore is a relationship. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can save is time with someone you love. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, fixing something broken can fix something inside yourself that you didn't even know needed repair. That quote is the lesson Thad taught me, both in life and in death. Some things are worth fighting to save, no matter how impossible the task might seem. Because the real measure of success isn't whether the engine starts on the first try. It's whether you loved something enough to never give up trying.